I bet you can't guess the number one complaint that I hear from nonprofit leaders. I'll give you 3 seconds. It's always the board, right? Why won't my board work? Or I've got one person on my board who does all the work and the rest just sit on their butts, right? It's always the board. Boards are creating so much negative energy within nonprofits, and they're sucking up the time and energy of staff and other board members. So I'm going to give you 7 tips to help you build an effective nonprofit board, okay? The first tip is personal connection between nonprofit staff and board members. And then personal connection between all of the board members, right? This is often lacking. Sometimes it's 12 strangers sitting in a room attempting to accomplish something, right? There's no personal connection. So you've got to set aside time to make sure that you're connecting with each board member individually, right? And it doesn't have to be like, hey, I eat dinner with every board member every week, nothing like that, right? But you've at least got to sit down and get to know them on a personal level. It can't be all business. It can't be all professional. And then beyond that, they have to sit down with one another and get to know one another, right? You can even clear some space within your board meetings to allow for that personal connection. But if it's all business and it's 12 strangers sitting in a room, you're always going to have a productivity problem. Right? If you were the coach of a basketball team, would you just pile 5 strangers into a room and say, all right, go at it? Or would you let them get to know one another, right? How do you think they're going to perform better? Obviously, with the personal connection, that fuels productivity. It fuels transparency. People are more comfortable sharing, all of those things, right? So the personal connection is incredibly important on the board, and it's something that I see a lot of nonprofit leaders struggling to make happen. And sometimes it's because they don't want to ask too much, right? Or they don't want board members to show up to a board meeting and think, well, I'm just sitting here connecting with these other people. Don't let that scare you. Make sure the personal connections are happening because that's going to fuel the productivity of your board. All right, number 2, clear communications and education or training for your board members, right? Many nonprofit leaders are swamped with tasks. They're running here, there, and everywhere. And one of the first things to fall on the back burner is properly educating, training, and communicating, with your board, right? A lot of nonprofit leaders attempt to get away with the bare minimum approach, right? Like, I'm just going to do just a little bit over here just to make sure they're okay. And then I'm going to run over here and do all of this stuff. It's a recipe for disaster, right? Your board members a lot of times are in the dark on what they're supposed to be doing, how they can be most effective within your organization, and they don't always know, or they might even say, I'm not being used to the fullness of my skill set within this organization, right? And it might even be beneficial for you to ask them those questions directly, right? I have a worksheet in my online course that asks those questions. It's for board members. Hey, do you feel like you know what you're supposed to do? Hey, do you feel like you're really being utilized to your full potential within this organization, right? Really important questions to ask board members to make sure that they feel like they're being utilized, right? All right, number 3, unclear or untrue expectations, board expectations, right? Sometimes even unwritten expectations, which is not a great scenario to be in, right? But you've got to make sure you become crystal clear on what your expectations truly are, right? Sometimes that document of expectations does not actually mirror what you're feeling inside that you would really like for board members to do. Put it all out there. Put it on that document. I don't care how high of a bar you think it is. Put it out there, right? If those are your expectations, put it out there. And those who can't live up to the bar will not join, and those who can will, right? But they've got to make sure, you've got to make sure that they're clear, they're written, that everybody knows them, right? Board expectations are something that my board sees before they ever join the board, and then we go over it in more detail, right? They see that multiple times. They know what the expectations are. So there's no confusion regarding, what am I supposed to do? What are the expectations here? And then at the end of each year, we go back over those expectations and hold them accountable to those things, right? And say, hey, I'll have them self-evaluate. How do you feel that you lived up to those? And then I'll discuss how I feel they lived up to those as well. But a lot of times that meeting's going to go really well if you took care of it on the front end, right? And again, don't be afraid to set your expectations high. Quality board members should be contributing a lot to your organization, right? Otherwise, they're not passionate enough about it to be board members, and that's totally fine, right? They might still be passionate about it, and they might be good volunteers in other ways, but that board member status is really important, right? It's somebody who works for the organization at the highest level of the volunteer totem pole, right? So you got to make sure those expectations are really high. Okay, another thing that demotivates the board is an inability of the nonprofit staff person to identify the wheelhouse of that board member, of that particular board member, and then plug them into the nonprofit in the way that they can operate within that wheelhouse. And by wheelhouse, I mean what lights their fire, what are they good at, right? Too often, we have board members just fill in and take over a task because the nonprofit needs it, but not because the board member is passionate about it, right? Or that they're truly skilled at it. You've got to figure out, what is this board member passionate about and skilled at, and how do we unleash them to run in that lane within the context of our nonprofit? Don't let board members pick up tasks that aren't in that lane, right? That's for somebody else, and that's fine. We'll find somebody else. But if you continuously have people doing things they don't enjoy doing, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to become demotivated, right? You've got to identify that lane and help them to run in it. Okay, another thing, and I think this one's fairly obvious and we all know it, but we don't always respond to it well. Board members have a lot of other stuff on their plate, right? Many of them have families, they have full-time jobs, and they're trying to do this in their free time, right? So that tells us a couple of things. Number one, we have to communicate regularly and sometimes even communicate the same bits of information multiple times, right? And a good board member will not be annoyed by that. Actually, they'll be thankful for it, right? They'll be like, oh, I overlooked that email a couple of days ago. I'm glad he or she sent it to me again, or whatever, to make sure that we're on the same page, okay? And here's a little side note with respect to the board member who's too busy with other things, right? They're too busy to respond to your emails. That can be a good excuse for the short term, but it cannot be the all the time standard, right? You cannot allow that to exist within your organization. If it is happening, it's probably a really good person who is either doesn't have the insight or doesn't have the heart to admit that they don't care enough to prioritize responding to nonprofit staff. It's not something to be upset with them for. It's not something for them to beat themselves up about, right? It's just the truth, and that's okay, right? You've got a million other things that are important in your life. That's totally fine, right? But we've got to make sure that we're not allowing that to slide, right? That's not a good board member. We've got to stop trying to convince ourselves that it is, right? Okay, and that brings me to the next thing. Sometimes you just have the wrong people on your board. And what I'll say with respect to keeping this from happening is vet, right? Vet board members on the front end. Even if I know somebody really well personally, they will not join my board until they've met with me, until they've met with our board chair, and until they've attended a board meeting and everybody has had eyes on them and an opportunity to share their opinion on the potential person who's joining the board, right? I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's your grandma. I don't care if it's the president of the United States. I don't care. Vet them. Make sure they're going to be a good fit. Put those expectations in front of them. Go over them in detail. Even if you feel like, they've already read these. No, go over them in detail. Make sure everybody's on the same page. The best thing you can do to keep the wrong people off of your board is to not put them on there in the first place, right? It sucks up so much time and energy when you have the wrong person on your board, right? Solve the problem by not adding them in the first place. Okay. And with that said, you might say, I think I've already got the wrong person on my board, so what do I do? When to let your board member go, right? You can let a board member go when you've ensured that you've done all of the things that I've talked about previously, and you've had a heart-to-heart, transparent, honest, kind conversation with them about this without anything improving, right? Or improving to your standards, right? At that point, distance is the solution, right? And it doesn't have to be some mean thing, right? You're not evaluating their self-worth by dismissing them from the board, right? You can see it as an act of kindness, right? It doesn't have to be personal. It's just the wrong fit. And there's a million reasons why it could be the wrong fit, right? Here's a good example for you. I had a board member that was incredible for 5 years. I mean, just amazing. Guy was crushing it. But he had his 6th child, right? And on top of that, he was in a leadership role in the banking world. He became incredibly busy. So, on the one hand, incredible board member. On the other hand, just didn't have the capacity anymore to perform up to the standards and expectations. So he left the board, right? And he did it on his own accord because he recognized it. And a lot of times good board members will do that, right? They'll say, hey, you know what? I'm just not living up to the expectations. I'm going to have to get out of here. That's totally fine. But even if he wasn't, right? We would have had that conversation eventually of like, hey man, I love you. I think you're doing a great job, but you just don't have the capacity to plug in like you should. And I can see it as me setting him free, right? Go spend more time with your family, right? Stop worrying about this. This is silly compared to that. Go do that, right? And here's the benefits of letting a board member go, right? A demotivated board member will poison the whole group, right? The board members who are motivated will lose motivation because they'll look around the room and they'll see, you know what, there's 6, 7 other people in here who don't do anything, right? I'm doing all this work. They're not doing a thing. Why am I doing this, right? Or I pass the ball to them and it falls through the cracks, so on and so forth. And they'll just say, you know what, I've had enough of this. I'm not going to continue to perform at the level. I'm not going to care as much as I care if nobody else in this room cares, right? Excellent board members respect high standards and they want to be a part of excellence, right? They don't want to be a part of mediocrity. And here's the deal. To identify the right board member, right? They will be plugged in. They will respond to your emails. They will show up to events. They will contribute at board meetings, right? They will do all of those things. And it might help for you to think of yourself as a board member for another organization, right? Think of another organization that you're incredibly passionate about. And if you were sitting on their board, what lengths would you go to for that nonprofit? Now, don't allow any of your board members to fall below that standard, right? And here's what's happening a lot of times is that nonprofit staff or leaders are just afraid to have the difficult conversation, right? Or they're afraid that they're asking too much of their board members. Again, ask a lot and then have the difficult conversation. If that person's not there and they're not contributing up to the expectations, that's totally fine. Have the conversation. And as you set those expectations really high, you'll find the right people, right? You just got to continue looking under the rocks and find the right person, the person with whom your mission resonates on a really deep level and who's really motivated to contribute. They're out there. I promise. I've had boards full of them. Keep looking, keep searching, make sure you're doing these things, and good luck.